Hello everyone. Okay, so on this video we're going to be looking at opinion polls, and I can't really think that many questions they can ask you about opinion polls in the exam. We're going to look at the question, evaluate the view that opinion polls play a positive role in UK democracy. I can only think there are going to be variations of that question, do they enhance democracy? I suppose they could ask, are they important in our democratic system? Which I think actually will be similar points to what we're going to go through on this video. Before we look at the arguments for and against in the essay kind of style, I'll just highlight what an opinion poll is. So basically it's a company and their job is to ask the public and to find out what they think on a certain issue. It's all done quite scientifically. They make sure they speak to the right number of demographics which matches the country and geography and all that type of stuff. And there's 3 or 4 different types of opinion poll. There's one which the media tend to get quite fixated about, which basically deals with voting intention. So they'll ask people, if a general election was held tomorrow, who would you vote for? You get them as well, would you vote for this person as opposed to that person, or what characteristics, does this person have over that person? The other issue you get are policy ones, where they might ask the general public about certain policies and what concerns them and, what suggestions there might be. And then the third one, a private one. These are ones which don't get public attention, and they're actually conducted by political parties. They will pay for an opinion poll company to do a poll to find out, what the public think of them and their ideas, or their opponents' ideas, actually, etc., etc. So that's what opinion polls are. So the question is, do they play a positive role in our democratic system? So look at the positive, and then we'll do a negative for each one. So you could argue that they play a positive role because they do allow the governing party and the Prime Minister to know how popular they are and what popularity their policies have. Because one issue with politicians in power in particular is they get caught up in the Westminster bubble. The Prime Minister is obviously surrounded by security behind the gates at Downing Street. And so they don't really have that much opportunity to interact with, if you like, the general public. So opinion polls do give the governing party almost like a weekly or more regular update as to how they're doing and how popular they are. And this can be quite important because they need to know that their policies and ideas are being successful, or they're getting the message out which they want to get out. They also play an important role for the Prime Minister because he has the power, or she has the power, to determine when a general election is held. And so Prime Ministers will look at opinion polls and stuff to say, now's the moment to have the general election. We're ahead in the opinion polls. The party's been seen quite positively. Now's the time to have it. So in those respects, they do play a positive role, or they're effective for democracy, or they enhance our democracy. And of course, you'd have to say why those things are good if this was an essay. The counter-argument is that, well, to put it bluntly, they can be wrong. There's been a number of cases where opinion polls have actually been inaccurate and therefore perhaps given the governing party a false impression about how popular they are, which has actually led to some catastrophic results. So, for example, I think the most recent example was 2017. Theresa May looked at the opinion polls. She was way ahead of Jeremy Corbyn and Labour in 2017. She called that snap election, hoping she's going to get this majority. And as we know, that 12-point lead she had actually was like 2 points or something, and she actually led to that hung parliament which had all those repercussions. So they can be wrong, and so politicians got to be very much aware of this, and that could be a negative because obviously it then led to the whole issue of, well, destroyed Theresa May's prime ministership, didn't it, I suppose. Okay, another argument in favour of opinion polls being good for democracy is that they can help political parties shape their agenda, shape their manifesto, shape their policies to what they think the public wants. And after all, political parties, their aim is, isn't it, to get the public to support them, to vote for them, so they can get into power to enact what they want. And political parties will conduct opinion polls, and they'll do focus groups, which is where they invite a small group of voters of a certain type to discuss policies and get ideas. So, for example, Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, opinion polls said that his plans for rail renationalisation were really popular, and that was obviously in the manifesto. 2019, I think the Conservatives had a polling done which suggested that people, even Remainers, just wanted to get the whole Brexit thing sorted after dithering for the last 18 months to 2 years. And so the Get Brexit Done manifesto was kind of born. New Labour under Tony Blair, especially in the first term and the lead up to that first election, were often accused of being like slaves to the opinion polls and having these focus groups, and they realised that they were a bit weak on the economy, so they tried to put a big effort into beefing up their economic policies and credibility, etc., etc. And these are quite good, you can argue, because political parties should do what the public wants, deal with their concerns, and so therefore this allows parties, to know what the public are after. The counter-argument to this, of course, is that it can lead to either politicians being slaves of opinion polls and perhaps not having the principles to actually take a lead. And again, if you're going to be in power, sometimes you have to go against what the public want and actually lead the country, for their own good, if you like. For example, would David Cameron have actually promised that referendum on the EU before the 2015 election if the opinion polls hadn't suggested there'd be a hung parliament otherwise? Possibly not. In 2012, George Osborne had a budget which he believed would be quite popular, and it wasn't. And so again, the opinion polls showed that unpopularity, and he began to alter that budget. So you could argue, and Tony Blair as well in the first term was often argued as being a bit slavish to opinion polls, and just doing what they said as opposed to actually taking a lead. And so these can be quite negatives. It can actually lead to parties not having deep principles or making unpopular decisions because they're afraid of what the opinion polls will say. Okay, a third argument to say that opinion polls play a good role or a positive role is that you could argue that they actually encourage participation. If opinion polls suggest that the election is going to be close between, say, Labour and Conservative, or in a referendum between the two sides, that can encourage people to go and vote. So if you look at the 1992 general election, the opinion polls suggested it was going to be a close election with Labour narrowly ahead. That obviously would encourage Labour people to go out and vote to make sure the Tories don't get in. It would also might encourage the Conservatives to vote to make sure they can try and stop Labour. This 2014 Scottish referendum I might also put in this category as well. The opinion polls seem to really tighten in that final week, and a lot of people, it seemed to go from almost a certainty that Scotland would remain in the UK to be much closer. A little bit of a panic, David Cameron went up to Scotland suddenly, as did Labour leaders, etc., etc. And the turnout was really high. I think from memory, it was 84%. I think in the Scottish referendum election. So you might argue that's partly down to opinion polls. Although you could also argue it's such an important issue, something which the Scots were really interested in, perhaps there would have been a lot of participation anyway. The counter-argument is that actually the opposite can be true. If opinion polls suggest there's going to be a clear winner, a landslide winner, then that can actually discourage participation. So the 1997 general election, Labour were way ahead in the opinion polls. The turnout was relatively low in 1997. And in 2001, it was even lower. Was it 54% from memory? Something like that. Again, because the Conservatives were nowhere, Labour well ahead. So the opinion polls, you could argue, contributed towards that low turnout in 97 and particularly 2001. And so this issue of participation, it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes they can promote it, sometimes they can also go against it as well. I think a final positive of opinion polls, this idea that they can be used by opposition parties to kind of hold the government to account. They often might use opinion polls to try and attack the government with over certain things. So at the time of recording this in April 2022, there's been lots of debates about Boris Johnson and the whole Partygate, and quite a few Labour MPs, I noticed, and SNP MPs as well, in the debate about Boris Johnson, all the rest of it yesterday, were talking about how 75% of people, according to opinion polls, believe that Boris was wrong and all this type of stuff. So they can be quite good for democracy, for helping to keep the government to account and all those sorts of areas. And then the counterpoint can be, well, how much influence does it actually have on the way politics works? And actually, if you just go down with what opinion polls say, then you can just be slave to the polls, and actually you need those deep-rooted policies and stuff like that. So there's some of the points you can make for this question. Opinion polls play a positive role in UK democracy. Arguments for, arguments against. I think a lot of these points you could also use, just perhaps to tweak them slightly, for a question like, the importance of opinion polls in our democratic system, or evaluate the view that opinion polls have got too much influence, something like that. Again, you can use these points, you might just need to tweak them to fit into the question. The crucial things to do is to make sure each paragraph you've got the two arguments, and you say why. Why does the point you make suggest them being positive? Why is the counter-argument suggesting they meant the negative view? And then really crucially, why is your view more important? Why do you think the strengths of opinion polls outweigh the negatives, or vice versa, depending on what your argument is? Okay, I hope that's given some ideas about opinion polls. No doubt I'll do another video in the not too distant future.